Damned magic. There's always bound to be a compromise somewhere, thought the deity. His humanity was already making itself felt. The dry heat was beating down on his head, and his armor was getting extremely uncomfortable. With a thought, the armor changed into a dark brown hooded cloak, protecting his head from the merciless sun. Then an expression of his magical will turned his battle hammer into a greatsword. Fighting in the open called for more than a smashing weapon. A lighter one, capable of slicing through enemies, would serve him better. The involved distance might prove counterproductive for a solid melee bludgeon meant for close combat. Magic had its uses, but sometimes one had to enjoy the feeling of wreaking death on a personal level. It was a tiresome walk. Hatu tried moving in energy form, but the magic wouldn't respond. Weak, he concluded. Walking in faster and magically assisted strides worked, and even though a resulting breeze arose, it was too arid and hot for his taste. He finally settled for an invisible magical cover for his head and a cooling effect on the atmosphere ahead. It was a constant drain on his energy, but the deity didn't mind. There was no way he was traveling in parched and hellish circumstances. A cloud of approaching dust caught his attention. It was man-made, and examining the spectacle, he could see it was a mounted group of men. They were armored in a patchwork of mismatched protective gear and were riding fast toward him. He smiled. His profile must have stood out against the desolate flat landscape. They were the first mortals he would encounter in this strange place, and he looked forward to meeting them. They were men, even if they were obviously bandits. Hatu halted where he was and waited for the welcoming committee to arrive. Nearing his location, the band split into two, each group moving to a flank. It was evident that they intended to surround him. He wanted to show a panicked face, but his inner nature got the better of him. He grinned in anticipation. The bandits surrounded him as he expected, with menacing pointed spears. A large, burly man clad in fur armor barked something at him. Hatu didn't understand the language. He could have used his magic, but deemed it a waste of energy. Talking to dead men was useless, but the tone was unmistakable. It was hostile, barbaric, and arrogant, a mortal used to being obeyed. The dark entity quickly laughed, unable to prevent the mirth from spouting forth. He moved at the same time. They were simpletons, the dark entity concluded, but he only needed one. In the blink of an eye, 9 men were decapitated where they sat on their saddles, their blood adding color to a monotonous landscape. A 10th lost both arms and a leg and fell into the ground screaming. Hatu had always thought that the sounds of pain and dying were always an excellent accompaniment to any plan to inflict terror and shock. The man would die in a few seconds anyway, but his screams already served their gruesome purpose. The dark entity ended the encounter with the leader's head grasped in his hand. The formerly arrogant fellow had found himself kneeling on the ground beside his horse, with Hatu's gauntleted hands holding him in place. A series of guttural sounds erupted from the bandit, noises which the dark entity assumed to be pleas for mercy or something similar. Instead, he looked at the bandit leader's eyes. Creating the first of one's minions was always a moment to remember. Hatu had his sentimental moments, and this was one of them. A surge of energy flowed through the hand which held the bandit in place, and the man's pupils suddenly became quiet, and his pupils turned white. The skin took on a tinge of gray, and Hatu could see that the bandit's physique took on additional bulk. He removed the hand, and the former bandit stood up and gave him a bow, bent at the waist. Hatu looked at his new creation. After a few seconds, he shook his head. "You need better attire, Dark Warrior," he concluded.